Good morning. Welcome to the Windsor Star News Cafe. I'm Don McArthur, here with Dale and Kristy and Windsor Mayor Eddie Francis. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We were just joking off camera. No one's going to return our calls on the 28th, and no one's going to call him back on the 28th either.
And I said that nobody's returning my calls now, so I'm used to it.
Okay. We're going to let Drew Dilkin stand on his own 2 feet about Milson's claim about whether or not there's raw sewage going into the river. But we want to talk to you quickly about regional transit.
Sure.
Horwitz had a press conference yesterday, talking about it. Everyone we've had on the show said regional transit is a great idea. So I guess we're scratching our heads why we don't have it, and is it an achievable goal?
Yeah, I think, everybody's campaigning and has talked about regional transit. And I think we have to step back and really look at the history that's involved on the regional transit process. From a City of Windsor's perspective, we are in support of regional transit. We would be willing partners and have always been willing partners in regional transit. But you really got to step back and take a look at the process in terms of why it hasn't evolved. You need the county municipalities on board. The City of Windsor cannot just run a transit service into county jurisdiction without their approval. It just can't happen.
Okay.
And in that regard, there are certain towns, Lakeshore specifically, and I know Tom Bain and the Warden is very supportive of the concept of trying to get a bus line, especially to Patillo and to the Patillo area, through Windsor to Lakeshore. And several years ago, those discussions were started through Lakeshore, and Lakeshore was driving the process to try to get the county municipalities on board, because if we're going to run a bus to Lakeshore, obviously it's got to stop off in Tecumseh. So Lakeshore started the process, and Lakeshore began the discussions, began trying to get Tecumseh on board. The town of Tecumseh, for their reasons, have never subscribed to this regional transit model, to the point where Lakeshore was not successful in doing it. There was a follow-up meeting that took place, and I know I was there and the mayors were there, and I used to have these mayor luncheons where I'd invite the county mayors where we've talked about it. But I think this particular case, if memory serves me correctly, there was also county council and city council participation. And the idea of regional transit was shelved because the county council of the day basically directed that they wanted to do an overall study to try to get it done. Now, since that time, and in the interim, Tecumseh went and started their own bus service, right? So if regional transit's going to start, Leamington's not going to subscribe to it, because Leamington's going to tell you that, why should we pay for the overhead of Transit Windsor when we already have our own bus service? And the same thing for Kingsville and the town of Essex. So if regional transit is to be successful, you first need to start off with Tecumseh and Lakeshore, and you need to get them on board. Lakeshore is already on board. The question becomes whether or not Tecumseh gets on board. And then obviously LaSalle, right? You start with the closer bedroom communities. But to do that, there needs to be an agreement, and there needs to be an understanding in terms of how the framework of that system would operate, how the costs would be distributed. Is it possible? Yes. Is it doable? Yes. Oftentimes you've heard me say during the State of the City addresses, and you've heard others mention during the campaign trail, that we've had relationships with the City of Detroit. We're the only jurisdiction on the border, a foreign jurisdiction that operates a bus service in the United States, and that's Transit Windsor and Detroit. That doesn't happen anywhere else. So we have that level of cooperation, and at one point in time where we had an arrangement with MDOT and with SMART, the bus systems in the U.S., whereby we would honor each other's tickets, right? So you can get on the bus and, by virtue of transfers, those would be honored. So I think regional transit would be very important. Having said that, I think that's one element of the overall transit strategy, right? I think what we need to do as a council going forward, and the next mayor and council will be in a good position to do this, is just over the past several months and over the course of the summer, we've now consolidated the transit, the tunnel, and the airport authority. In short order, there will be a new leadership position that will be announced. We've been going through the interviewing process, interviewing candidates that will oversee this new entity. And we did that to consolidate, to drive efficiencies, to drive money back into the transit service. Because the transit service in Windsor needs to be fixed first. And what do I mean by it being fixed first is you need to improve the frequency of transit, you need to improve the ridership of transit, and you need to make it more appealing for people to use and for people wanting to use. Well, the way to do that is you get better routes, you get shorter routes, you improve the timing, and that you need to pump money back into the operations.
So that is something that's happening right now, because that was one thing that Horwitz pointed out, that I think it was 97 or so, that was the last time that the routes were updated. So that's something that I guess Transit Windsor's already looking at.
The routes have been updated. The recent consolidation that we've just done, the whole premise of that consolidation is to free up money and to find efficiencies, and those savings then to go back into transit so that transit can use those dollars to improve their service. And transit has had a master plan. But it's one thing to have a master plan, it's another thing to have a plan, implementation plan.
Right.
And an implementation plan is driven by money. So the reason we did the consolidation was to allow for those efficiencies then to be pumped back into transit, which then will allow them to make the changes that they need to do. You know, they've already made changes to the summer schedule as a result of this consolidation. They've made changes to some of their other routes. But I think transit, you know, if I look at 0 to 5 years, 0 being now, you're going to see smaller buses in neighborhoods, smaller routes, more frequent routes connecting to larger routes through the main routes, electrified fleet, and at the same time, then I think regional transit comes in as another component. But regional transit will not happen unless the town of Tecumseh and Lakeshore first. I think that's the first leg you start off with.
Right.
Lakeshore, I know, has always been there, and Tom Bain's been a strong advocate of that. But it's a matter of getting Tecumseh on board.
Which has to start, though, with the conversation, right? So I guess the one benefit of this election is the conversation's been opened up. So hopefully that's bringing the issue to the front of people's minds. And
I think the conversation's always been there.
Yeah.
It's going to be whether or not the political will is there,
Okay.
and whether or not the political will will make it happen. Because I've heard from a lot of individuals in the county, especially when, you know, because this is not a new issue. You guys have covered this issue on many times, many instances, and many covers of the paper, right? So we hear from county residents. There is a desire by county residents for regional transit. And I do understand the reluctance on county municipalities not wanting to take on more of a cost that they don't know about. But first, let's agree to the framework of the principles that we're trying to achieve. If we want to achieve regional transit, we truly want to achieve it, then let's agree to that. Then let's sit down and agree to a framework in terms of how we're going to pay for it, right? I agree that county shouldn't pay for Transit Windsor services in Transit Windsor, but nor should the residents of the city of Windsor subsidize county residents to use our bus system, right? And there's precedents for it. We've seen it with the Solid Waste Authority, we've seen it with IRCA, we've seen it with our water and wastewater deals with Tecumseh and LaSalle. And just as a side, our water is safe, despite claims that are being made. And this is another indication during election time that people will say anything for the sake of saying it.
Yeah.
But we supply LaSalle and Tecumseh water. We supply them treatment for their wastewater. So there is a framework that we can build upon, but the question is going to be whether or not there's a political will there to do it.
Okay, we've got to do another segment on transition to power because we've gone on transit. So you just opened the door. Walkerton was shameful, you're saying, about John Milson.
Yeah, I think, listen, I know that we're in the final stretches of the campaign. As mayor, and it's wrong to get up there and say that our water is not safe. I think that sends a rippling fear through not only our community, but Tecumseh and LaSalle for that use our system. There's one thing to make a point, there's another thing to take that point and to exaggerate it and to base it in fear. The fact of the matter is, I understand what John Milson was trying to say in terms of if you want to make the argument that we should correct and, you know, catch up with the 200 kilometers of disconnects from overflow, that's one point to be made, and that would be fair ball. If you want to make a point that our environmental record has been lacking because it still continues to allow overflow, that's fair ball. But to say that the water is not safe, in my opinion, that's what I read and that's what I took from it, I think is wrong. And these are the type of tactics that you see the last week of the campaign that, in my estimation, I think cross a line. Having said that, I think our record is pretty clear. He's trying to tie it in that we should have never built a pool. Well, the fact of the matter is the retention treatment basin, the Lou Romano plant, the millions of dollars that we've spent on our sewers have all been geared towards fixing the system. And what we have done and what we've been able to achieve is spend more than while Milson was mayor. But to say that we should have never built a pool, I think ignores the other fact of the matter is that when he was mayor, they had more problems with sewers than we do today. They had more combined sewers than we do today. They didn't have Lou Romano, which we have today. They didn't have a retention treatment basin that we had today. But they still went ahead with a Cleary build. They still went ahead with expropriating property for an arena that never got built. So I think it's one thing to attack a record, but to attack it based on the safety of water, in my opinion, is wrong. Like I said, I expect everything in the campaign, and this is another example. You're going to see more of this the final days. You're going to see these wild accusations get thrown out, but it is what it is.
Okay, we're with Windsor Mayor Eddie Francis in the Windsor Star News Cafe.